Greetings, you intrepid Herle Burlyites. You know, I've been thinking, if Oprah can have a book club, if Reese Witherspoon can have a book club, if Jenna Bush can have a book club, well then so can David Herle. Welcome to the completely unplanned for, unsanctioned, and likely massively unsuccessful launch of the Herle Burly Book Club. First rule of Herle Burly Book Club, rum goes with every book, if not every chapter. Second rule of Herle Burly Book Club, Coke goes with every rum. Third rule, no fucking lemon wedges. Fourth rule of Herle Burly Book Club, introduce the bloody authors already. 2 fine writers today, each of whom just launched books dealing with the same subject matter. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, his rise and his rule. Stephen Maher has been writing about Canadian politics since 1989 as a columnist and reporter for Post Media, iPolitics, and Maclean's. He's a multi-award winner, and his latest book is called The Prince, The Turbulent Reign of Justin Trudeau. Paul Wells has, for years, been one of Canada's great political journalists. I've felt the sting. Formerly at Maclean's, the National Post, and the Gazette, he now publishes his own widely read subscription newsletter, paulwells.substack.com. His book is Justin Trudeau on the Ropes, Governing in Troubled Times. As you might expect, we'll talk about what compelled them both to write about Trudeau and contrast their respective takes. Gentlemen, real pleasure to have you on the Herle Burly. Thank you for helping me launch my own book club. It's always been a dream of mine to compete with Reese Witherspoon on something.
I've always thought you could compete with Reese on many fronts, David.
Are you both in hotel rooms?
I'm in my office.
Oh, okay. Just looks like a hotel room. Yeah.
Every wall of this place except the one behind me is pretty good looking, but this is my utilitarian wall.
Excellent. So hey, before we start talking about books, let me ask you this. What is your favorite biography of a Canadian Prime Minister?
Golly. Crichton's Life of Sir John A. Macdonald.
Yeah, why?
Like most people, I think I grew up thinking old writing is boring writing, you know, and it's an extraordinarily magnetic, charismatic writing voice that he had. Oh. When Sir John A. gets up in the House of Commons to defend his conduct in the Pacific scandal, it reads like Aaron Sorkin. It's just amazing, and I absolutely buy that we've got a more complex conception of Macdonald now than we did then, but it's still just a rip-roaring read.
Steve, what about you?
I think I would have to say Richard Gwynn's Northern Magus.
Hey, that's my choice.
Oh, really? Yeah. It's I read that or reread it while I was researching this book, and I found his intimacy with the subject was really striking. He knew everything about Pierre Trudeau, or he seemed to, and which I think likely had to do with the fact that he'd previously been, and I only learned this recently, part of Eric Kieran's office at one point.
Okay, right.
But a great writer, and his book on Sir John A. is fantastic as well, or his books.
So you launched into these respective books on Justin Trudeau. Let me stick with you, Steve, for a second. Did you find him to be an interesting subject?
Yes, in that there's a lot of things that happened that were interesting, that either happened to him or that he caused to happen. But the comparison between he and his father, I don't think he lacks his father's mystique, right? This is something that Gwynn gets at, that Pierre Trudeau had a kind of remove, kind of cerebral quality that created a kind of tension around him. And Justin seems, in a way, a simpler sort of subject. He's not, you don't have that sort of sense of mystery, but he's also similarly kind of unknowable, as one person said to me, profoundly unknowable.
Really? What do you think, Paul? Interesting guy?
Yeah. I've caught myself saying this a couple times since I started doing the rounds for this short book of mine. I miss him a little bit because obviously, since I've turned more critical in my coverage, I'm not, he doesn't have me round the pub very often.
Stopping on the pod either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And although the night's young, the thing that always fascinated me about him was that he struck me as self-aware. He saw the effect he had in a room. He saw the slightly weird advantage that he had in a celebrity-obsessed culture. And he had an ironic relationship to that he could talk about. And he's been, I always pay way more attention to my subtitles than anyone else does. Governing in troubled times is intentional. He's been the prime minister during some extraordinary moments in our history. And his reaction to that is inevitably going to be interesting, even if it's not sometimes the most creative. It's just, how can you not be an interesting personality in a war zone?
Right. Let me just pick up on Paul's comment about self-awareness, though, because I think it's interesting. So I went to see the Monk debate in 2015. Sitting in the audience watching the debate, one of the things that really struck me, and it's to Paul's point, is how Trudeau comported himself physically when he wasn't speaking, when the other people were debating, and he wasn't on the camera and the focus wasn't on him. Most people in that circumstance might relax a little bit, slouch a little bit, shift their posture, glance around, something. Not him. He was behaved as if people were watching him the entire time. So I agree with you. He's very self-aware in that kind of a way. But is he really self-aware?
So part of my shtick is that, and I mention it in the book, is I have in recent years started asking just about anyone who needs to work, with him, to go into meetings with him, what those are like. Because I don't have that much access. And I don't ask Katie Telford. I ask people who don't give a rat's ass whether this prime minister succeeds or fails, but they're stuck, in meetings with him. I assume that's a reasonably objective cohort. And they say, for instance, that you can talk hypotheticals. You can say, we could do this, we could do that. And he's cool with that. You can blue sky, you can throw stuff at him that he wasn't expecting. It's to some extent, it's a measure of the point we've gotten to as a country in our relationship with this guy, that I have to sort of repeat and emphasize that he's not a fool who's likelier to swallow his tongue than make it till sundown. The public discourse around this guy is such a caricature that I've got to say, well, no, there's a real person in there, as far as I've ever been able to see. But that's where we are.
Yeah, no, Steve, I was just questioning because of things like, there's some obvious, it feels to me, blind spots in him, like the vacations, for example. Anybody should have known, and I'm sure everybody in his office did know, that those things were going to be received poorly. Yet he seems not really to understand why he's been judged on things like that.
Well, or I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that he knows, and so I interviewed him and spoke to him about the most recent vacation to Jamaica, and what he said is that his life with his family is very difficult, that he can't go see the kids at basketball or trampoline because it creates a scene. And if you look at his history at that place, he's been going there since he was in diapers, and it's something he wants to share with his children. So I would say that it's not that he's not aware that it's going to cause headaches for his staff and him politically. It's he's putting a higher priority on what he sees as his, desire to create a nice time for his family, which says something else about his character. I see it as kind of capricious or strange, but, at some level, and I've been quite frustrated by this from the Aga Khan vacation on, but at some level, when I start to think about it, I think, well, that's how he feels about what he should do for his family.
All right. Well, since you're in a charitable mood, let me stick with you and ask you, after writing this book, what do you consider his strengths as a leader to be?
I think he's empathetic and has believes that he knows, as he once said, breathes the country in his bones with every breath he takes, right? I think he has a vision of Canada. It's a vision that is not shared by the entirety of the country, obviously. But he has a sense of the country and a commitment to it. And he sees himself as like a teacher, a helper, and a nice person who's trying to draw people together. And it must be kind of painful that at this time it has to be obvious to him that he can't be that person anymore.
Right. Paul, what do you think his strengths are?
I think he's got some. I'm just trying not to repeat what Stephen said. It's more in what he's accomplished, right? I mean, he's held the Liberal Party together beyond hope of question for the duration of his time as leader. Yep. And the party had a 40-year history of infighting that he simply switched off. Like, that's just gone. I mean, but to the extent it should come back, he's more formidable than his detractors outside the party, and then people who wish they could inflect his choices inside of the party would have suspected. I mean, that's part of the fighter metaphor, which establishes the central metaphor for the book, and then I make some effort not to lean on it too heavy because I know some people are sick of that damn boxing match. But it's his party. I put him at Maclean's, a now defunct political magazine. We used to have an annual power list, and one year we put him at the top.
You treat Maclean's like I treat Ignatieff.
Yes, exactly. As a former Canadian official. I put him at the top of the power list one year because the point I wanted to make was, look, like it or lump it, and this would have been 2019 probably. You like where the country's going. There's nobody you can blame except Justin Trudeau, because his control over the PMO is uncontested, his control over the party is uncontested, his control over Parliament, even in a minority situation, is uncontested. And so that's, I think, a concrete accomplishment.
Here we are at the beginning of June. Not that I think you need a calendar reminder. I say this to emphasize the uncomfortable fact that wildfire season is already here. June, not July. And in the interest of precision, wildfire season started this May in Canada. So with that bit of relevance, I want to continue this tack about our presenting sponsor TELUS and how they continually invest with social purpose. This week, a story about their Pollinator Fund for Good, which has put almost $50 million into innovative startup businesses driving social and environmental change for a better world. Like Dryad Networks, a Berlin-based startup that provides ultra-early wildfire detection technology, as well as health and growth monitoring for forests through solar-powered sensors combined with Internet of Things networks. Already this year, Dryad's small green hexagonal sensors have been deployed across 85 hectares around Yale, BC, a township on the Fraser River, halfway between Vancouver and Kelowna. And just in case you're thinking, what's a mobile company doing in the middle of a boreal forest where there's nary a smartphone user? That's precisely the point. TELUS's wireless networks are key to the whole enterprise, as Dryad relies on them to connect their sensors to the internet. Herle Burlyites, these are the kind of social good investments that are so critical, and in this case, so timely for our well-being. TELUS only wants to keep making them. But as I've been saying in this space, regulatory conditions are a big player in what they can get done. Right now, the government is laying the groundwork for a new wholesale regime. TELUS believes that the best way forward is a tailored approach that considers not only regional differences, but also the companies who continue to invest in their services and how they can make Canada a better place to live. So let me stick with you and say, in what way is he badly misunderstood by Canadians?
it's funny. Susan Delacourt and I like each other's writing, but we don't normally crib off each other. But she and I have both written about how he's an introvert, and we both gotten the same reaction, which is fuck off, right? Like he's clearly an attention hog, but I don't believe that. I think the attention is a given. He's never known how not to get the attention. And so he's learned how to manipulate it to some extent. But he doesn't much like people. There's a scene in the...
people said that about his dad too, right?
Yeah, although...
That he liked mankind, but not man, right?
Yeah. Trudeau was a little bit more at ease with his coldness to some extent, Right. There's a scene in the memoir where he's new to McGill and he's in the Shatner building, and someone points to this ruffian and it was Jerry Butts, and says, "You should go and meet that guy." And his first reaction is, he says, "I thought I already had enough friends." Like, he's 18. He lived in a castle behind a moat until he was 14. How could he possibly have too many friends? And yet, that's his first reaction then. And trace it out. Which world leader does he have a solid alliance with? Which provincial premier does he like to call up and shoot the shit? I hear that's the case with Wab Kinew, but it feels a little bit like the summer when we were being given to believe that he was buddies with Mark Carney. Like, I don't buy it. So I just think he'd rather, and I have some sympathy for this, just unwind rather than pal around with people.
Yeah. Steve, same question. How's he misunderstood by people?
Well, first of all, I want to say that on the question of introversion and extroversion, I largely agree with what Paul just said. That there are similar sort of conclusions that I reach in my book, as he was just discussing. Misunderstood. I'm not sure that he's hugely misunderstood. I mean, there's the people who think that he's out to destroy Canada, that he's a dummy. I don't think those things are true, but those are just sort of partisan.
But can I just pick that up? Like, I mean, I saw a poll recently by a woman named Kyla Rennellenfitch that showed very, very few people were inclined to attribute intelligence to him. And he is a really smart guy. All three of us have met him. He's a very smart guy, right? IQ, very high. What is it about him that has given people the opposite impression?
I don't think, for one thing, I don't think that he's a great storyteller as a politician, right? He doesn't have the gift for narrative that Tony Blair or Obama or even Chrétien in his, unique way had, the ability to persuade people of something that springs out of his head and into our minds, right? That is not his gift. He looks good. He's vigorous. He's athletic. But his intelligence, I sat down with him for a 1-hour interview in February, and I was struck by his engagement, the liveliness of his mind, his ability to, you can imagine what it's like. I'm trying to get a bunch of little things to stick in the book from him. And he was prepared and knew the kinds of things I was looking for. And you can see his mind kind of racing to fill in that thing. And that's what I understand he's like in meetings, right? He's a quick read. He has always done his homework. And, that I don't know that people see that about him.
Right. Paul, is that because of the platitudinous approach they've taken to public communications?
Yeah. Incidentally, that's my next book if I ever get off my ass to write it, which is
Platitudinous?
Communications. Yeah.
Yeah.
Platitudinous. That's a title that's going to leap off the bookshelf. We'll think it's about Australian marsupials, but the conviction that people who have come into politics since about 2007, 2008, that the social media avalanche is going to destroy you unless you just hammer message. All you can ever do is hammer message. And so they've turned into a bunch of robots who incidentally can't listen. I do think partly because of that, Trudeau doesn't strike people as a surprising or original thinker. Like, it was routine for Stephen Harper, Jean Chrétien, even given the sense that people had that Chrétien was not they believed that Chrétien was not very well educated. But on any given day, he could reframe a central debate of the moment. I remember one time he brought out the Clarity Act, and he was getting ready to do this, and everyone was very nervous. And Jim Munson, who was then a reporter for CTV, said, Prime Minister, a lot of people say that this you should let sleeping dogs lie, that this debate is none of your business. And Chrétien said, Canada is my business, sir. Well, like, he didn't need to say more. He didn't, I can't think of a comparable case where Trudeau has seized the opportunity of question period, for instance, to get people thinking a different way about something. You give him the question, he plays the cassette. And so I think to some extent you have to see the guy close up to have a sense of his lively intelligence, because he hides it.
Steve, at the end of the day, so I'll just give you a for instance. And Paul won't like it because it's a Paul Martin example. But we're going to keep having this dialogue, Paul. We're going to keep...
It's healing.
But when I first met Paul Martin, he talked to me about Indigenous affairs and improving the quality of life of Indigenous people. And the last thing he was doing in government was the Kelowna Accord. And he went on to work on Indigenous issues in his retirement years. What does Trudeau care about? I mean, you're in office, you have to deal with a whole range of issues. He's been quite active and proactive on a number of issues. But what is it that he cares about? What passion did he bring into this?
The unkind answer would be he cares about Justin Trudeau's celebrity, right? Like, that's the harsh critique, which I don't particularly want to make, but that's, you kind of have to recognize that that's in the air around him, right? The idea that he's very much about looking at his own image and having his image be observed. But I think the Indigenous file is actually real. And it's something I've heard you say on a related podcast, that his commitment of time and money and political energy to Indigenous issues are out of proportion to the political benefit that he might get. And but I would also say the sort of honor of Canada is at stake in this, right? I think I think we should give him credit, or I want to give him credit, for helping change the idea that we had that Indigenous people, that we could not think about closing the gap. Right. When I grew up, I grew up not far from Millbrook in Nova Scotia, and it was just sort of understood that those people were really poor, right, and always would be. Yeah. And that is no longer true, and that's changing. And he has done more. It's not perfect, right? I still can't believe he didn't go to the first official Orange Shirt Day, and I believe there may have been an attorney general that didn't work out that well. But he's put a lot of effort into that. And you look at the quality of the people that he's put on it. And I would point to the fact that he does have a Haida tattoo on his arm. So that, that he got, I think, before politics. So, I think that's something that history will observe, that he moved the ball forward and that he cared about it.
Paul, you have a different answer?
I think it's funny. I think he came to his vocation fairly late, because he didn't run on like diversity, inclusion, reconciliation in 2015. If asked, he would have, that was baked into his persona. But I think it became something he led with after that. And I think what we'll find as a society is there is simply no coming back from the positions that he has established on those questions. I spoke to a very conservative legal scholar who said people in my camp need to understand that the constitutional law on this is deep, deep, deep. That reconciliation is an imperative, and offering some Indigenous organizations some spoils from resource development is just not going to cut it. And Trudeau got that, and I mean, not unflaggingly, right? Like the period where Seamus O'Regan was Indigenous Services Minister, the period when they thought they were going to define a new Crown Indigenous relationship, and then just dropped it because it was hard. I mean, it's not triumph after triumph, but it's sustained engagement on an important file, and with no reward particularly,
and a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Which represents in political terms opportunity cost. That's money that's not going to other things that presumably generate more votes. Right.
It's funny that they think they've been fiscally rigorous, eh? Like if you read the stuff that Tyler Meredith puts out, it's clear that they set themselves a much higher fiscal envelope than anyone would have set for them. And then they congratulate themselves on staying within that envelope.
Guardrails.
Yeah.
Guardrails. So let's talk a little internal stuff, because I find this to be important. Do either of you know why Jerry Butts left that office?
Stephen, I bet you asked.
I think I do, and I would commend my book to readers to help understand that. He was in a very difficult position in that he was known to be a good friend of the Prime Minister when SNC-Lavalin starts falling apart. And I think he judged correctly that if he had stuck around, that there would be a real possibility that everyone would think that the Prime Minister was taking stuff on the chin that was Jerry's fault, because he was sort of involved with recruiting and managing unsuccessfully the relationship between the Prime Minister and the Attorney General.
Okay.
I want to say this. Everyone who's read my book should also read Stephen's. Judging from the sales figures, that's happening. His book's doing quite well. And partly because
neither book is available in my local Indigo as of this morning. Sold out in both books. Sold out in my local Indigo. Excellent.
If I can say that everyone should also buy Paul's, I would like to say that.
I'm going into the studio in a couple of days to record an audiobook that we're rushing out because we really were not expecting there to be any demand. But anyway, he does the reporting on this, and I think I actually undersell SNC-Lavalin. Even in a short book, I don't talk about SNC-Lavalin much, whereas Stephen goes into great detail, and his take is what I would have. You know, he points out crucially that Jody Wilson-Raybould's successor did not make a different decision than the one that she made, which suggests that maybe she had a fucking clue. And that throws back the question of what on earth were all those people doing bugging her? What on earth were they doing? But as for Jerry...
You know, by the way, I'm just going to say on that issue, and you both have history, you could contradict me. I can't think of a Prime Minister of Canada that I have known that would not have wanted to save SNC-Lavalin in that circumstance.
For all intents and purposes, they didn't save it. Like it ended up paying a substantially higher settlement after a guilty plea, than far higher than they would have under this newfangled deal they were trying to get, and higher than average in such cases. And I
I just don't think Trudeau was particularly venal on that. Like, I think that was normal.
Yeah, wishing the company the best and sending an endless procession of flying monkeys to harass the attorney general are two different things. But
if I can just interject, because I think you're right, David, but our commitment to the OEC anti-bribery treaty means that we should not be interfering with prosecutors in these things, because the reason that we wanted to do that, why Trudeau wanted to do it and all these people wanted to do it, is for reasons that we have signed treaties agreeing not to consider, right? In order to engage in the worldwide struggle against this kind of terrible corruption, companies are not supposed to, or countries are not supposed to let their big national engineering companies off the hook when they spend a decade bribing a terrible dictatorship. And we were not, and probably still are not, at the forefront of international anti-bribery efforts. And so there was pressure from abroad for us to agree to do a better job at these things. And I feel that that's a sort of part of this that gets missed, as if it's sort of just kind of, oh, well, it's good to save jobs. In that we've kind of agreed not to do that if companies are, what they do is too bad.
Right. So, palls of smoke are already smudging the big skies out west. Hundreds of wildfires have already erupted, most in British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, and about half of them are burning out of control. Thousands of people have been forced to leave their homes in Fort Nelson. Once again, the devastated city of Fort McMurray in Alberta has been placed on evacuation alert. Last year was the most destructive on record, and the federal government is predicting another potentially catastrophic summer as the western drought enters its third year and temperatures continue to spike. Our sponsor, CN, will be in the thick of it. CN trains will continue to roll. They simply must for the sake of the economy. Sometimes, trains are first on the scene of a wildfire in the Canadian wilderness. And 3 of CN's trains will actually go looking for flames. Their names are Poseidon, Neptune, and Trident. They are actual firefighting trains, able to reach and suppress wildfires, often more quickly than traditional first responders. Until this year, Poseidon did battle alone. Neptune and Trident were unveiled by the railway last week. Each of them carries 49,000 gallons of water, foam, and fire retardant, along with pumps, hoses, and water cannon. Their crews are specially trained CN employees and contractors. Neptune and Trident are also equipped with 2 360-degree cameras, one at either end of the train, providing fire officials with a real-time line of sight. The 3 firefighting trains will provide CN with a powerful suppressive counterpunch, capable of keeping tracks open and routes clear. By now, everyone understands the destructive force of climate change. There is no choice but to adapt. That is what CN is doing. It will spare no effort to ensure its trains continue to leave and arrive on time. That's a promise. Back to butts. So I'm going to throw a simple paradigm at you, and you can react to it. The government lost its sense of direction, lost the plot when Jerry left, and hasn't recovered it ever.
So somebody very close to this crew said to me a year later that what this government has lacked is a chief operating officer. It wasn't really Jerry, but to the extent that it had one, it was Jerry, and it's missed him since he left. Incidentally, I didn't get around. I was so busy relitigating SNC that I didn't get around to answering your question. I think Jerry had begun to check out before SNC broke. He would on Facebook, he would be posting a page or so from some tract by Emerson from the 1800s and circling a paragraph and saying, yeah, this is what you need to understand if you want to understand the current labor strife in the Midwest. And I'm like, Jesus, Jerry, you've got a job. And I think to some extent, in the cordial, genteel power struggle between him and Katie, he had already lost, and it was fairly easy for him to walk.
Okay, well, let's move on to that then, because this is I think, quite underreported story, which is the relationship between the Prime Minister and Katie Telford. She is the longest serving and becoming by far the longest serving Chief of Staff to a Prime Minister in Canadian history. And in my view, it's a more rigorous role that she's taken on than previous Chiefs of Staff may have had. I think she probably has more obligations than Jean Pelche did, for example, in the Chrétien office. And what is the story behind her longevity? Why is she staying so long? And what is the nature of the relationship between those two people? Stephen, do you want to crack at it?
Yeah, well, I think that he relies on her greatly. A lot of people think that it's excessive, right? And I think if you compare his reliance on her and previously his reliance on Jerry to previous prime ministers, as you point out, there's it's kind of unusually close, right? That Chrétien, and Paul would know more about this than I would, but had a sort of cast of characters who would play different roles at different times. And there was a sort of bit of a team of rivals approach. And there appears to be none of that with the Prime Minister and Ms. Telford. It's been very successful. When they started, he was a third-party critic for national sport youth, right? And so it's taken them a long way. The critique from inside is that he is too protected by her and the small group of people around her. I don't think it's fair to tag her for that, and I think we should be careful to the extent that people can be kind of sexist about women in powerful roles. The resentments seem to build up a little quicker around women, I think. So there's this critique, but I don't think it's fair to tag her with that, because if she's sheltering him from people and circumstances that he doesn't like, it's because that's what he wants.
Paul, what's your take on the rather unique closeness and longevity of this relationship?
So after the 21 election, Trudeau had a long meeting with an acquaintance and complained bitterly that he didn't have the office organization, the government structure that he thought he needed to be successful. And I said to this acquaintance, and who kind of agreed, well, look, he's got the government he wants. If he wanted a different government, he's the prime minister. He could have a different government. Like, at some point, you don't get to complain. And I think, like, to me, it's not axiomatic that one must change chiefs of staff every couple of years. Mulroney did. Harper did.
Pierre Trudeau did.
Pierre Trudeau did, yeah. But Pierre Trudeau kind of didn't know anyone, like,
right.
Apparently I have to do some politics now. Harper only got rid of Ian Brody because Ian Brody got in some hot water on a bilateral file, and I do think that the weaknesses that everyone identifies in the Trudeau government are things that the prime minister legitimately owns. Like, they're not the utter inability to come to a decision on a secondary or tertiary file. Like, if something's not saving NAFTA or surviving COVID, they can't do it. Stephen on the long list of people who couldn't get a simple yes or no to an interview request for an absurdly long time. If the prime minister needed people to snap to and follow protocol, he could make that happen. He doesn't care,
Yeah.
And he leans on Katie, I think, more than is healthy, but she doesn't have some sort of weird Svengali power. He could wake up any day and change his staff out. Lord knows he's done it with cabinet ministers.
Right. Right. Let's leap to that, because one of the things I find interesting is, they're an old government, and one of the things that old governments sometimes do to not look so old is to bring in new people. And Trudeau seemed tremendously interested in top talent before 2015. Like, he went after big fish and got them. Chrystia Freeland is an astonishing recruit of a candidate for a third place party. Bill Morneau was a big catch. Andrew Leslie was a big catch. We can go on and on. Jody Wilson-Raybould was a big catch. We can go on and on about the talent that they pursued to put together that government. And they haven't brought anybody like that in since. There were some awkward conversations with Carney that didn't go anywhere a few years ago. But otherwise, no significant influx of talent. What do you make of that?
The Carney thing is interesting because I'm told that you may recall a certain story in the Globe and Mail about Bill Morneau, in which we learned that the Prime Minister was thinking of taking him out of finance, which came as news to Mr. Morneau. And at that same time, they were romancing Mr. Carney, and apparently he got spooked by that. What kind
by
of
how ruthless they were with Morneau?
Pardon me?
By how ruthless they were with Morneau?
Yeah, by how they're sticking the shiv into Morneau for doing a bunch of things that they asked him to do. And there's been this kind of dance back and forth. He's that sort of guy, the most obvious person who's inside the movement but outside the tent, who could maybe change things electorally for the Liberal Party of Canada. And I'm told that they have opened the door and invited him in, but they haven't laid out a nice comfy rug like sometimes.
That's a Tim Murphy quote, by the way.
I know.
That takes me back. That's a deep cut.
So they haven't done that. They haven't given him the Grey Wall treatment.
Paul, I think you've written a lot about this. Like every government before it, Trudeau's was heralded at the beginning as a return to cabinet government and a diminishment of the power of the center. That's obviously not how it's worked out.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, since every government is more centralized than the previous government, despite their promises, is this just because the kids in short pants want to completely control comms? Or is this a reality that cabinet government doesn't work in this world? This world's too fast. The things are moving. And you actually need the executive power at the center.
I think there's some of both. I mean, I noted the kind of mutual admiration society that Eddie Goldenberg and Ian Brodie had in their books, which, especially Ian's, was designed to be more a theory of prime ministerial power rather than a tell-all memoir. And I don't think he quotes any source more than Eddie Goldenberg on how you have to govern for the center. For some reasons that struck me as perfectly pragmatic. One of them is that a good minister who's working hard on their file doesn't really know what's happening in the rest of government. If you're being a really good justice minister, you don't really know what's happening in fisheries. And committee assignments are designed to palliate that a little bit, but I think with limited success. So only the Prime Minister's office, or only the PCO, or the central agencies, finance to some extent, can really keep an eye on the whole picture. I also have read Rory Stewart's book about British government, and it strikes me as kind of a horror story version of where we're headed, because in that book, nobody even pretends to know what's actually going on. Nobody even pretends to control anything. They just make pronouncements. They just announce that they have solved crime or saved the British forest, or and then and then they get shuffled. It's just an astonishing portrayal of things. And I think it is too tempting to too many practitioners. I'll just claim victory and like, who's going to tell them that it didn't happen? The newspapers? There are none anymore, you know?
Steve, it's clear that a lot of these people that were recruited, whether it's Jody or whether it's Bill Morneau or whether it's Jane Philpott and others, believed the rhetoric that ministers were going to have real power, believed it was going to be a more decentralized, cabinet-structured government. What do you think happened to that?
Well, first of all, I want to say that one of the things that I find most irritating in politics is when anyone says we're going to do politics differently. No, you are not. There's one way to do it, and that's what you're going to do. So, you know, the striking thing about those three is that none of them had any track record in partisan politics. So in a sense, it's embedded into the proposition that Trudeau is making to the country. We're going to have real change, hope and hard work, a cabinet that reflects the diversity of the country. And to do all that stuff, to be what it said on the box, they had to put people into jobs which they were not, in a sense, qualified to do. I don't have to tell you, you would know much better than me, how demanding and difficult it is to be a federal cabinet minister, especially finance, justice, the top tier ones. So they had no choice but to put a whole bunch of people into those jobs, and ultimately it didn't work. Right? You can't do that.
Right. So they had the wrong people in the wrong places.
I think so, but it was part of their promise and optimism, and not everything went as planned.
Well, right? Finance and justice are tough places to start. To walk into Parliament and be the finance minister or the justice minister, this is quite a thing. Yeah, Paul, you were shaking your head when I said that.
Yeah, because that's why. One of the things I tried to do with this book is to make Trudeau a prominent character in it, but not to make it. Not to insert the reader in the head of Justin Trudeau, because other stuff was going on. All of those problems that befell that government were a direct result of the terrible decade that the Liberal Party endured beforehand. They didn't have wizened cabinet veterans to rely on, because everyone in that class with any talent and ability had either lost their seat or gotten the hell out.
You are accepting my friend Ralph Goodale from that description.
Well, as a matter of fact, yeah. On specific, fairly overlooked files, not only do I miss Ralph Goodale, he's missed in the governing apparatus, because he watched over his flock. He took care of the details. Most of these folks didn't. He could have been the finance minister, but to Steve's point, that didn't fit the visual. Yeah,
right.
I remember the morning that Chrystia Freeland was given her battlefield promotion to finance minister. I'm the guy who was out on the TV saying they should give it to Duclos. I want to safeguard my reputation as the guy whose advice nobody takes.
Yeah, but is he alive?
He's. I think the healthcare negotiations broke him. I think they put him out there to say the things that a health minister should say at such a time. And meanwhile, Ben Chin was negotiating the health deal. So I think Duclos whatever, I'll show up at fundraisers, whatever, and that happens to people in government.
Okay. Steve, do you have a sense of how Trudeau's relationship with his ministers differs from how his predecessors dealt with ministers? I'm intrigued by the fact that so many of them say you can't get a one-on-one meeting with him.
Yeah. That's the difference. That they felt he was remote. I would say that the same is true of caucus. That traditionally in these caucus meetings, the Prime Minister says, well, we got this problem and the department tells me we should do this or we should do that. I want to hear from you. That was what previous prime ministers all did. What Justin does is say, we've got this problem and here's what I'm going to do. Now I want to hear from you, right? So he lays down the line within caucus. I was struck how remote he is. As I was researching this book, I would call people sometimes and say, well, you work with the guy. What's he like when you talk to him on the phone? And they would say, well, we don't talk on the phone, right? I don't really know him or work with him. I'm not part of that charmed circle. And obviously, you look at all the people who left who are kind of grumpy. It's an unusually long list of former ministers who either quietly or out loud end up not feeling massaged in that old Mulroney way, right? Mulroney, I don't think, with some notable exceptions, Lucien Bouchard, mostly his former colleagues really liked him.
Paul, you've written in the past, and I found it really interesting, and I don't fully understand it, so maybe you could flesh it out for me, that meetings with Justin Trudeau are not real decision-making things. They're something different. There's some sort of relationship thing, but they're not a transactional thing.
Yeah. That's a paragraph from Mary Dawson's report on the Aga Khan vacation. She's now deceased. She was the ethics commissioner, and before that, she was deputy minister of intergovernmental affairs. So I knew Mary Dawson a bit from the National Unity Wars. She wasn't a creative writer, right? She was a by the book, and if she wrote that in her report, it would be near verbatim what she had been told more than once as she investigated how Trudeau governs. And yeah, it said a meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada is not a decision-making event. Decisions are made before, after, or independently of the meeting, which means for all you know, I just take that as a little. For all you know, while you're meeting with the Prime Minister, the decision is being made somewhere else. And I think that's a product of his fairly short apprenticeship in electoral politics, because anyone who'd been in politics long enough to have to eat some bitter defeats and spend a couple months out there just humiliated for something they did or didn't do, all the stuff that actually hadn't happened to Justin Trudeau by the time he became Prime Minister, would I think have reached the conclusion, look, you know what, it's going to suck or it's going to be great, but I'm just going to make the decisions because I'm going to wear them whether or not I made them. So, I remember the week I reached that conclusion as a journalist many years ago is I'm not going to report conventional wisdom, because if conventional wisdom is wrong, people are going to make fun of me. They're not going to make fun of conventional wisdom. So, and I don't think he ever reached that point. So he has the meeting, and then they huddle to make the decision. And as I started to say early on, I really believe that Justin Trudeau is present at almost every important meeting. But that's kind of the extent of it. The meeting makes the decision. It's, not every time, but a lot.
Well, okay. I want you to become a psychoanalyst now. And I think that we would agree that he's somebody with quite a high EQ as well as a high IQ. And yet he seems unable to summon contrition or apologize for any of his own actions, which are kind of important in relationships over time. And so, it's a common criticism that he's quite willing to apologize for things other people have done, but not at all willing to acknowledge any fault on his own part. What part of his character is that?
Can I say that I disagree with you in a sense, because I thought his apology on blackface.
Well, that would be the example. That would be the exception. That would be the exception. Yeah.
By the end of that thing, there was nothing you could say about him that he hadn't acknowledged, right? And it was just about perfect. And if he had done that wrong, he would not have won the election. right? If he had messed that apology up, if he'd said, well, obviously my critics are fools, and they're the real racists.
Yeah.
He didn't do any of the 20 things he could have done to mess that up. And the other things, the big things, SNC-Lavalin, I don't think he could apologize for that. Because he would have to be acknowledging that what he did was wrong, which he doesn't think, and all the people who were working for him didn't think. So I'm not sure that and I suppose other things, like we're in a terribly divisive moment now, partly because of him, because he divided people around mandates. So if you were to ask me something that I think he should apologize for, I would say that, right? He hit those people when they were down, and they bit back at everyone else, and we've been living with the consequences ever since. So that's a good example, I guess. Why can't he say that he messed that up?
Well, I think it reveals itself in ways that are both personal and business. Like on the personal side, you can take those vacations, any of the vacations. If he'd acknowledged that they were out of sync with people, he might have taken some of the sting out of it, but he won't. And then something like on a policy front, like when you're trying to pivot on an issue like housing and be seen to get ahead of it, it would have been useful to say, well, maybe we dropped the ball on this a little bit early and it's gotten away from us, but we're on it now. But instead they say, well, as we've been working since 2015 on the housing file, right, as if everything's been perfect all along. And it just doesn't ring true with people after a while.
But do you think that that's unique to this government, or is that not true of every long government?
I guess maybe I expected that he might be better at it, that he might be more agile, because I think it does have a pretty good EQ.
So maybe the way to split the difference is that you do get apology from him, but you don't often get introspection. So he apologized for the blackface thing immediately, and then again the next day. But he didn't come close to explaining it. Like, look at the actual cases. There was one in high school. There was one in Sejep, and there was one when he was a working school teacher. He had that makeup kit in his closet for more than a decade. What? Like, I've pieced together a theory of how that could be, but we never heard that from him. He apologized for elbowing Ruth Ellen Brosseau, but the scale of public outrage at the guy, which I think is to some extent not justified by the record, although the record is spotty. I think is because you don't get the feeling that you're talking to a person when you observe the Prime Minister in action. He doesn't listen, and he doesn't explain, and he doesn't course correct. Right, so it's all, that's the on the ropes metaphor. All along, he's been waiting for us to get him, and I think that's increasingly frustrating for a lot of people.
Okay, so we've been in the weeds. Let's go up 30,000 feet for our concluding moments here. Here's the first question for you both: is he going to run again, Steve?
I would. It's a coin flip. I say no. I don't think he will. I think that he'll declare victory and ride off for two reasons, basically. One is I think his post-prime ministerial career would be better if he hangs up the gloves before he gets knocked to the canvas. And secondly, I think that a lot of people around him think it'd be better for the Liberal Party of Canada if he goes right now, and they're going to be encouraging him. But the guy is not going to show us. There's no tell that's where he's going to show us ahead of that decision, I don't think.
Paul, I'm not buying your boxing match metaphor. I'm not buying it. And I'll tell you why I'm not buying it. Because to the superficial eye, that might have looked like a mismatch, the boxing match. Big, strong guy versus a smaller guy. Somebody that looked like they grew up on the streets brawling versus a kid who lived a life of privilege. Everybody knows how this fight's going to go. But what did Trudeau know? Trudeau knew that he was a trained boxer and the other guy was not. Trudeau knew that he was in excellent physical condition and the other guy was an overweight smoker. So there's an obvious path to winning that.
And
You've understood.
He had a reach advantage too. He had longer arms, which matters in a boxing ring too.
Exactly. But there's no similar offsetting weaknesses in this circumstance. There's no comparative advantages that he has like those.
This is, I mean, I'm pretty happy with the boxing metaphor because apparently the book buying public in Canada buys it whether you do or not. But it's very much me reporting what I hear he tells people. And the problem with that metaphor that I can spot is that he selected the context of the boxing match in 2012, and he selected Pat Brazeau, kind of faute de mieux after having tried other potential opponents as his opponent. He sure didn't select his fourth consecutive conservative leader in a post-COVID world where people feel like the most basic purchasing power that anyone should aspire to is out of their reach. He didn't pick that fight, and yet that's the one he's in. And so, as I hint at the end, I think the metaphor is becoming pretty limited. It's not. This isn't that.
Yeah, he's not underrated right now. He's losing. That's a different thing.
If you're going to put us on the spot, you should put us both on the spot. I mean, on what's in Trudeau's head, I've got to say some of my best information these days comes from the curse of politics at the end of the day on Monday. And you guys are all convinced he's going to walk. I essentially, in the paperback edition of The Longer I'm Prime Minister, I essentially predicted that Harper would walk, and I was wrong. These people are people, and they can surprise us. And if he wants to be a stubborn cuss, boy, there's no force on earth can get him out of that chair. You know?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Well, I know of one force, but it's not likely to be put together. But in any event, so what will endure from Justin Trudeau? How has he changed Canada in an enduring way?
I feel like I wish I had some marijuana here, and I would say nothing in full view of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. That's a pretty significant
Just like
thing. Margaret
used to.
Yes, exactly. Maybe put on the live at the Alma Combo record. I mean, that's huge. I think the Canada Child Benefit is huge. I go on about it a lot. You know how many people in, I would say, strained personal circumstances have had their lives made much easier at that moment when they're having their first or second kid and they don't know how they're going to pay the bills. I think that's huge and very significant to the people it affects. I had put the carbon tax in that column, but now I'm increasingly dubious about its longevity after Justin Trudeau. And something that I didn't really put in the book, but started thinking about afterwards, is kind of reassembled a progressive idea of Canada that had started to look pretty shock-worn in the Harper years, and reasserts it as Canada's image. And I spoke to Mr. Mulroney, and he said the two things would be NAFTA and COVID. So all in all, it's not a bad list. I think it stacks up pretty well against a lot of other prime ministers.
Okay. Paul, how do you think he's changed the country?
So in the book, I mentioned COVID and NAFTA. And those are, it's a little bit like Chrétien's decision to stay out of the Iraq War. It's a dodged bullet, you know, rather than a real change to the landscape. When
you say COVID, what do you mean? Do you mean like the CERB, or like what are you referring to?
Yeah, I mean paying people to stay home and paying businesses to keep operating when they had no clients.
Right.
I would draw a pretty stark distinction between the first year of COVID and sort of 2021 onward, when the battle was nearly won, and he tried to milk it for extra credit with mandates and things like that. But I got to say that progressive vision of Canada that Stephen evokes, I believe, has been left more shop-worn at the end of Trudeau's time in office than it was in the first little while. I don't know who thinks government. I certainly don't know who thinks this government can make Canada more competitive, can enhance innovation, can make a real difference in social mobility. And I think a contribution of this prime minister will have been to undermine the notion of progressive government pretty durably.
Interesting. Just expand on it.
Can I take my comment back?
No, but we can both expand on this for one more minute. Tell us a little bit more about what you think about that, Paul.
This astonishing habit that they got into early and stuck with of making announcements and then not demonstrating results, of declaring victory before they had begun the fight on a bunch of economic policies.
But these are the people. These are the people that came in with deliverology and with public report cards. Like, they were determined to be accountable for delivery of what they said they were going to do.
I mean, it's funny that I'm astonished that Matthew Mendelson, who was the deliverology guy in the first mandate, still carries water for this government, because it's not even a caricature of what he thought he was going to deliver, which is steady progress towards publicly identifiable goals. You know, like that went away in the first few weeks, and it's and the answer is that this government has the correct opinions on issues that matter to him. Just as right now, the greatest admirers of Pierre Poilievre are the ones who aren't remotely interested in checking the math on his housing policy or anything like that. They just like the cut of his jib, you know? And those of us who like to, who believe that government can deliver results, have been increasingly disillusioned by this government. And speaking only for myself, aren't super optimistic about its likely successor. Like, we're getting closer to the Rory Stewart vision of a government that simply play acts, and whose party stripe is not that important.
Yeah. What did you see, Steve, as the core components of that progressive agenda that you see him having put together?
Well, there were three things that I thought: inequality, climate, and reconciliation. That there was a fairly sustained push, and at some point, I noticed that in one year-end interview, he had dropped inequality and was talking about equality and diversity. Right, so there's a sort of tension there about whether equality and diversity is as central as inequality. But those are the three legs of the stool. And while I agree with everything Paul said about their failures to deliver results on these things, and the implication for that, if you think the government should do things that we need it to, then it's kind of alarming when they are not able to produce a passport in time for your trip, right? You're eroding the public confidence in that sphere of life, in the public sphere. And I think that suggests to me that it's time for a change of government, right? That's when things get like that. We generally, you'd say, well, the government should change. It's time for a reset.
This is something that progressive politicians need to pay more attention to generally, which is, if you're the advocates for government, then you better make sure it works. Like, if you're going to propose governmental solutions, then you have to care about the mechanics.
But it's, in practical terms, I think that it's often hard for liberals, because they colonize the public service and the public service colonizes them. And so you have this big immovable blob that's designed to avoid accountability in both official languages after filling out all of the Treasury Board guidelines that were set for reasons nobody can remember now, and hand out the contract to the dodgy company with somebody whose great-grandfather lived on an Algonquin reserve, right, as in arrive camp. So you get all this stuff where you get the feeling somebody needs to get in there and start asking whether the policies are working, like program review in the Prime Minister that you work for, right? That kind of thing. So you do kind of worry, especially for Liberal governments, that the machine just sort of starts wandering off like a robot that's writing its own programming. And I will conclude by saying, where are those billion trees? Does anyone remember what happened to them?
Paul, any thoughts?
They spent a few days trying to convince us that they had never promised that stuff.
I remember, yeah.
Then didn't they claim they'd done a bunch of it?
Well, they
in another program that wasn't supposed to be counted against that program.
They counted a bunch of stuff that they had explicitly said, of course, they weren't going to count because these were going to be used. And this is where, since it was the Prime Minister who made the promise, if the Prime Minister had got up on his hind legs someday and said, you know what, planting trees turns out to be real hard. We've learned a lot about planting trees. That's life, right? Like, that would have helped. But telling Canadians that they did not promise that is the definition of gaslighting Canadians.
Yes, right. All right, let's end on a party note. Trudeau is not like any of our previous prime ministers in the sense that he's a genuine international celebrity. So most of our prime ministers, when they stop being the prime minister, they become lobbyists or lawyers and represent business interests to dictators around the world for a living. But Trudeau, A, doesn't really have to earn a living, and B, is part of the beautiful people set of the world. What do you think he's going to do when he's done?
I'll take a crack at that, because I've asked a number of people who've given it a little thought. I think he hits the speaking circuit again. And like him or not, he has a global brand. If you're doing a conference,
it's in much better shape around the world than it is in Canada.
In some circles, certainly. Yeah. And if you're doing a conference in South Korea or Dubai, and your alternative is the former Swedish finance minister or Justin Trudeau to deliver your keynote, Justin Trudeau is going to put customers in seats. I kind of hope that he doesn't go to work for the Tony Blair Institute. A couple of his former guys have gone there. I find there's something a little creepy about the Saudi money. Not to chide those guys for going there, because they're not former world leaders, but I think that it raises questions about Blair's legacy after that war that he was wrong about when Kretschmer was right. So I hope that's not what Trudeau does, but I could see that being a good fit on the surface.
Paul, what do you think he does?
What has Sacha Trudeau been doing for the last decade? I think it will look a lot like that. I think it'll be, he will do productive labor for some kind of remuneration occasionally, but mostly he's going to live the kind of life he lived before he came into politics. A little less footloose, a little less carefree, a little less irresponsible, but basically float in that zone that most of us will never reach, where it kind of doesn't matter what he does to us or to him. I think he'll breathe a big sigh of relief and just go on being Justin Trudeau.
Yeah. All right. Listen, this has been fabulous fun. Thank you so much. I've abused your time, but it was I was really enjoying the conversation. So Stephen's book is called The Prince, The Turbulent Reign of Justin Trudeau, and Paul's book is called Justin Trudeau on the Ropes. Poilievre on the cover of it. little thing of Mr. Trudeau in a boxing suit. Thank you both for doing this. Great conversation. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, and all of you Herle Burlyites who watched or listened to this podcast. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week with more. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Thanks a lot.